Welcome to the Power of Design podcast, where we have inspiring conversations that explore the intersection of architecture, construction, and real estate, so we can understand the dynamics and trends that shape an exciting and powerful built environment. This is your host, Jack Osa. In today's episode of the Power of Design podcast, I'm having a great conversation with Sagar Rathie. Sagar is the Managing Director of Commercial Office and Mixed-Use Development at Crescent Communities in Charlotte, North Carolina. Sagar and his team are responsible for leading acquisitions and developments through the Southeast. With an active investment and pipeline development portfolio totaling 3.5 million square feet and representing more than $1 billion in capital deployed. During our conversation, we talk about placemaking, design experience, construction, development finances, and much more. This is my conversation with Sagar. Sagar, welcome to the Power of Design podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Excellent. Man, I know you are an expert at understanding commercial real estate development and the financial models that create successful projects. What do you think are the three most important characteristics of a strong commercial development project?
It's a good question. Personally, I think the three most important areas on the development side are accessibility, and that doesn't mean just in terms of how you get to a potential development, but also the quality, the access to equity, the ability to feel like you can grow within that space.
Yep.
The second is probably establishing a clear-cut design intent, almost like your North Star, if you will, for a project. And we've got a pretty unique process we use to do that at Crescent.
Yeah.
And I'd say the third, and this is probably the most important, is it needs to feel or at least provide some experiential aspect to it.
Yeah.
You should, anytime you're at this place, be it an office space, retail space, whatever it may be, it needs to elicit some reaction.
Yeah.
And I think without any one of those three, you're not going to be successful.
So is it common that people miss one or two of those doing, commercial developments?
I think people have gotten really good at two of the three, and they kind of haphazardly find their way to address the third.
Yeah. But, which one is the hardest one?
Quite frankly, I think the experiential aspect of it. You can find ways to create accessibility. You can find ways to establish a design intent early on, but creating a place that feels like you're learning from it, that you can experience something different, that it reminds you or elicits some reaction every time you're a part of it. That is arguably the hardest.
So how will you go about creating the perfect clear-cut design intent?
What we have found to be the most successful is creating an engagement very early on that brings all the stakeholders that are going to be a part of, or at least touch, feel, or somehow engaged with whatever development we might be working on to the table as quickly as possible. Within Crescent, we call that a canvas process. It's like a design charrette, but it's that on steroids and so much more, quite frankly.
Yeah.
It takes, it's a stated process that we've evolved over time that allows us to set the guidelines that ultimately are going to be the answer to any design or development or even tenant question we might have going forward. And it's pretty unique for us. It's a process we've had a lot of success with, and we can measure against it.
Yeah.
But what's most beneficial for us is once you've set that North Star for us for any given project, anytime we're trying to think about a problem we're trying to address or solve an issue that might come up through that process, or even thinking about things like palette considerations or landscaping for that matter, anything that you can touch or feel.
Yeah.
It needs to answer or address or be somehow aligned with that design.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think like anything, the sooner you start the conversations, the better, and getting involved, all the stakeholders that are part of that process, thinking about the design experience that you want people to have, the financials, the constructability, how's the design being part of that. That's definitely the best way to start a project.
And the community too. I mean, we have found particularly your neighbors, people that are going to be driving by or being a part of or somehow are associated with that within the neighborhood that your development might be in, bringing them to the table, particularly those that have influence and have stated opinions, be it either good or bad about what you want to do or pursuing. Having them there is very meaningful, because at the end of the day, anything we're trying to create or develop, it's not intended to feel like it's on edge. It's new. It's intended to feel like it's part of the existing fabric of whatever community or neighborhood we're a part of. A way we measure success is what we're delivering. Does it feel like a natural extension of the neighborhood? And if it does, then that means we've done something right. Yeah, cool. And we've messed up before. I'll be totally candid. We don't always get it right, but we try really hard, and it's made some tremendous success for us.
Right. Tell me about yourself. Where did you grow up?
So I'm from North Carolina originally, born and raised. I grew up in Raleigh, a small town right outside. Well, maybe not small anymore. Cary, North Carolina. Went to school in Chapel Hill, go Heels. Studied biomedical engineering. Went to go work for a pharmaceutical company right after. So I'm an untraditional developer background, I guess. Yeah. Spent a couple of years with Glaxo, which was great on the operations side of the business. I've always had an itch to come back to school. So I went to Duke to get my master's in engineering. I call that kind of the dark period in my life. I don't like to talk about Duke that much, but nevertheless, I made up for it. Went back to business school at Chapel Hill again. And right after graduating, went to go work in investment banking here in Charlotte, and was pursuing middle market M&A with a small firm here in the area, and found the calling to real estate not too long ago, and have been with Crescent ever since.
Nice. That's a very interesting path. I'd really like to know, what does a biomedical engineer does?
Biomedical engineering. Yeah.
What is that?
So I studied it, quite frankly, because I had a strong interest, one on the life sciences side. So I grew up in a family that was around healthcare a lot. And then the other was the engineering. I've always had an innate appeal for building stuff. So, the first thing I remember building growing up was like a Lego set. And, I won't lie and say that I haven't done that a lot recently. I certainly have, but ultimately I saw the appeal in doing something that kind of combined both, and biomedical engineering provided that. For me, it was really, it provided a really good backbone to think about problem solving, quite frankly. And when I went to go join GlaxoSmithKline Pharmaceuticals on their operations side, the vast majority of my work was really around, how do you take ideas that have gone through an R&D cycle and translate them into a manufactured product. And I found very quickly, as part of that process, as engaging and as exciting as it is, if you know anything about the pharma industry, it can take 10 years for something you work on to actually see the light of day. And the idea of waiting 10 years to see something happen, not nearly as exciting as I would have expected. Sure.
Interesting. And what made you decide to get out of that industry?
Well, I love the engineering work and the baseline for that. But I had this itch to go back and find ways to just expand my business acumen, quite frankly. And so I felt like I had this established technical platform, and now I needed to find a way to expand the business side with an innate focus on working with smaller organizations. Business school was an avenue for me to do that, quite frankly. And more importantly, investment banking was a way for me to really step into that after school. That is arguably I think one of the best ways to get to learn, figure out, and understand a business in a very short period of time, and be able to articulate, how those companies operate very quickly. Yeah. And it was incredibly challenging, but it was a fantastic experience.
That's awesome. What was your experience like on your first commercial real estate project? I'd say, being someone that doesn't have a traditional development background, I tell anyone that I sit down with and I'm having a conversation around my experience, I'm not like a traditional developer. I didn't start in development or real estate. I started with a technical background. But at the end of the day, development is all about problem solving. It's 10,000 little steps that you need to figure out. And ultimately they amass to the success around a development opportunity. So what I quickly had to figure out as part of my first real estate development deals was that it's no different than any other, 1,000-step process you have to figure out. But I'd say what's been the most rewarding piece of that is, at the end of the day, if you take things down to the bare bones of what any
any challenging situation is, be it either figuring out a development, figuring out the permitting process, or going through entitlements, bringing on a tenant, there's always a process and there's a path you can follow to get there. It's not going to be a straight line, but you'll figure it out. And that's honestly been incredibly rewarding in this industry.
Yeah. And what do you think are some of the natural abilities you have that makes you good at doing this type of work?
Well, it helps that I get numbers really well. And that's just, I grew up, trying to appreciate that as best as I can. I'd say that makes up for all the challenges I have on the qualitative and design side, if you will. And as silly as that may sound, at the end of the day, I spend a ton of time, and I'm very thankful for the people I work with at Crescent. They absolutely help me recognize the areas that I need to spend more time with them on, to advance my knowledge in the industry. But at the same time, I think appreciating that fact that I can't and won't know the answers to every problem, and I've got to go out and find help is a big piece of why I'm here today. Yeah.
Do you feel that business school give you real preparation for the real world?
I would say, if anything, business school opened my eyes to kind of what opportunities were out there and how to think about working with people across different backgrounds, different experiences, different skill sets, and bringing that all together under one roof. You're all aligned, trying to find ways to be successful. And quite frankly, that's no different than real estate. I mean, you think about an organization that's going through a development cycle, you're bringing in people that have design backgrounds, leasing backgrounds, asset management backgrounds, come from all walks of life. And at the end of the day, you can't be successful on an endeavor on the real estate side unless you've figured out how to work well together as a team. And business school did definitely contribute to that.
Sure.
It also helps that it was in Chapel Hill.
Tell me about your current role. What do you do with Crescent Communities? What type of projects do you work on?
I lead all of our office new developments and value add acquisitions across the Southeast on behalf of Crescent. So my role is to go out and find new ways and opportunities for us to expand our office platform. It's been really fun, quite frankly, over the last few years as we've continued to grow that at Crescent. And honestly, Crescent has a long history in it, but it hasn't been up until recently where we've recognized an ability to really latch on and kind of grow that. So I spend probably 90% of my day either finding new opportunities that we think align well with the goals we're trying to accomplish at Crescent in terms of creating a sense of place. Spend the balance of my time working with an excellent team that, quite frankly, we would not be anywhere where we are without them. Advancing those opportunities to where they need to, it's been a really fun ride.
Nice. Can you give me an example in very simple terms, like for somebody who doesn't really understand the industry, walk through like a typical project from start to finish? How do you make that happen?
Sure. So we'll start. At the end of the day, real estate, at least in some form or fashion, is around creating value, and the ways you create value are going to vary based off of either the investment thesis you're working on, the asset profile, or even the type of the location you might be at. But at the end of the day, it's about creating value in some form or fashion.
Yeah.
The first phase, I think the first most important step is figuring out kind of what's your starting point. So, if you're looking at a ground up development, it's what's the value of the land? What does that translate into in terms of creating a sense of place for a tenant? And what does that mean to them? And how can you deliver on setting an expectation for them that at the same time meets or adheres to the expectation for the land as your starting point. I'd say the next thing is once you've determined that there's a way to create value, it's the second phase is how do you actually execute on it, and that it comes down to planning the process. So what be it either the pre-development process in terms of design and aligning that with what your stated objectives are around the development, be it around entitlements or permitting, pre-construction. The process of terms of taking something, an idea, and creating reality out of it is that second phase. And then the third piece is, quite honestly, it's almost measuring, if you will, the value you have created. And I say that in the sense of not the financial value of it, but have you met the expectations, the goals that you set out as part of that endeavor.
Sure. So I understand, there are a lot of teams and professionals making that happen. You need a lot of different types of expertise to get to that point. At the end of the day, how do your team and your company makes money during that whole process?
For us, the translation to creating value or creating money ends up being somewhat secondary. And I say that because it ends up being an outcome of our success in delivering what we intended to do from day one to where we are at the end of our development process. We create that financial benefit, if you will, by transforming, reapplying, or rethinking how a location, an asset, a land for that matter, could be of a higher and better use. And ultimately, our objective is to try and do that by adhering to a vision that ultimately has some beneficiary on the back end, be it either a tenant, an employer, an employee. Value ultimately is created in the process of taking it from that first initial stage to where it is at the end. And we recognize that as a merchant developer.
Sure. What is a good example you think could be, anywhere in the world of a really well executed development project?
I'd say one that comes immediately to mind, and if you're familiar in Alpharetta, the Avalon development that North American Properties has worked on. That's a project that's failed twice, and in light of that, they've been able to create a pretty impressive mixed-use development that brings together not only just a number of different uses, but you've almost established a new zip code for that matter. You talk about the location as if it's a new place, it's a new community, it's its own neighborhood, quite honestly, and that's really what it is. But every time I have spent time in that area, I continue to be impressed with the experiential aspect of it. They've done phenomenally well in terms of accessibility, and the design intent was been well established on day one to curate an area, a location, a piece of a suburban area that up until the delivery was a challenge, and it's done exceptionally well for them.
Nice. Yeah. No, there are some places that you don't really need to understand much of the details of how everything came together, but you just feel right.
Yeah, exactly.
There are some places that you feel like, man, this feels good. Like, especially like in a nice sunny day and go there and like, man, everything,
it works.
Like the experience is great and you can feel the experience. And I think that's where, the power of design and all those decisions that have been made, probably years ago, they start coming together at one point, and it's that experience.
When it's amazing, some of the best ideas or the best examples of successful design, to your point, you don't get a chance to almost recognize or appreciate the energy and effort that went into that, because it feels like a natural extension of what you would expect. And if you're not thinking about it, if you're not pointing it out, if you don't see kind of the transition, if you will, of realizing you're in a pretty cool, unique environment versus, oh, wait a minute, this is just another office building. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
We'll be right back with more from the Power of Design podcast.
The Power of Design podcast is brought to you by OSA Studio, a multidisciplinary design firm focused on creating impactful experiences through the power of design. We partner with our clients to create buildings, interior spaces, brands, and strategies that help you deliver a successful project. As a minority-owned firm, we are committed to building a diverse platform of curious and driven design professionals so we can together pursue our full potential. For more information, please visit us at www.osastudio.com.
Do you feel like you have a huge responsibility, making all these decisions that there's going to be creating these spaces and open spaces and curious spaces for years to come for many people?
It's funny right now, we're in the process of like redeveloping the ground floor experience at One Independence Center, formerly known as 101 North Tryon. And when we first took on the asset, the whole idea of us changing that's been a piece of the identity of trade and Tryon Street, arguably the most important intersection in definitely in Charlotte. Sure, we would say, maybe even North Carolina, who knows? But the idea of changing the historical identity of that was pretty nerve wracking, and we didn't know what to expect when we originally were pulling the thought process behind that. But I think the reality is, at the end of the day, people expect and anticipate change happens, and how you actually take on and embrace that change is what matters. I know for a fact what we're planning on doing there from a ground floor experience standpoint, in terms of the open space that's there, the connectivity at the street level, the idea of how do we interact with the other corners of that intersection. 50 years from now could be totally different. I have no idea, but I know at least for the foreseeable future, it's very, very realistic. And I feel confident as we've continued to endeavor and explore the possibility of how we change that people are going to, they're going to embrace it. And yes, every single time we think about a decision that sheer magnitude, we have to remind ourselves that we set out a design intent and guidelines, if you will, around that particular improvement or around that particular sense of that particular place. And we were intentional with it. And as long as we're continuing to endeavor around that path, if we've got confidence in the idea, confidence in the decision, we do believe it'll be successful.
Can you describe to me what will be your ideal dream project where you're part of that, you're making most of the decisions, and you're going to have a big impact?
I think there's tremendous opportunity right now to do some pretty incredible urban infill redevelopment, if you will, particularly at intersections that feel like they need a change or have been challenged in the past. And the ideal project, I'd say, that would be the most impactful, I think, is something that takes on the challenge of transforming some of those intersections that are out there. And examples are the 5th Street intersection at Plaza Midwood, at 10th Street Central when it translates into King. South End, I think there's some pretty. I take that back. Let me restart that. You might want to.
Can you tell me about what will be your ideal dream project that you really like to work on and is going to have a big impact in the world?
I don't know about big impact in the world, but I'd say a dream project for us, or at least for me personally, is anything that is effectively a translation or an extension of an important component of a neighborhood that feels like it's been neglected. We're big believers, me personally, I'm a big believer that, our communities that we're in today, there's tangible history associated with them. And so, a new development might not necessarily be the best answer depending on where you are. Mm-hmm. That's not to say that could be, but we have found, or at least I personally have found, that there's a huge affinity right now for projects that seem to retain some characterization or some identity that resonates with the neighborhood. And it's not as if we're trying to, remove that or relocate that. We're just trying to add to it or improve it. And a lot of times it feels like more like sometimes those opportunities feel like they've lost their luster, and we're trying to reshine it.
I think that's a really good position, because most people maybe said, well, I'm going to just take over this empty land, 500 acres, and I'm going to create this masterpiece. But I think going back and really trying to revitalize the existing urban fabric that might not be at their best, and kind of doing some type of surgery or biomedical engineering to it, where you can make it better and improve the lives of people who are living there and who will choose this place and just take it to heal the place.
Yeah, I like that. That's kind of right on.
You're still a biomedical engineer. You can't get away from that.
Oh yeah.
Tell me about, how do you see the commercial office development industry developing into the future?
It's a really interesting time right now with COVID and the current environment. A lot of questions today around office and what happens with office going forward. And, I've heard everything and seen everything from office is going away to the office is only going to get bigger, to suburban is the appeal, to urban is the place to be. And I think the reality is we're kidding ourselves if we know the answer today. It could be 6 months, could be a year, who knows? What I do know and what I feel very confident about is that no matter what, people like interaction, they like experiencing things together. They crave the idea of being close by or the ability to have conversations and engage and feel collaborative with one another. I think the idea that office isn't going to change at some point soon is definitely not the case going forward. I think we just need to be mindful about I'd say probably the most important thing right now with respect to office, and it's more relevant today, especially as people think about the idea of flexibility and working from home, which is great. I don't think that's going anywhere. But I think organizations always also have to remember that talent continues to be a big priority for everyone, and it's only going to get more important going forward. Yeah. The workplace has always been a way to help attract and develop talent. I'm very confident that if tomorrow an employee had the option of working for somebody that had the exact same benefits, had the exact same program, had the exact same appeal, had the same flexibility, but one had an office space that was intentionally designed with the ability to feel experiential and collaborative versus one that did not, I think I have a very strong sense of where they would go. Sure. So I think that's the biggest challenge most people are going to face right now on the commercial real estate side, particularly for office developers, is figuring out the balance and what can they do with the opportunities that are in front of them to help empower their clients, their tenants, their employers, their employees for that matter. How can they use that space for the purpose of attracting talent?
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the key words is uncertainty.
Yeah.
Because, most people, I think our default thinking is we're hoping that things will go back to normal, but we're not sure.
Yeah.
So if they go back to normal, great. We just keep doing the same thing we were doing and it's going to work. But if they don't, then what are we doing?
Right.
And I've seen that I think psychologically is having an impact on people making big decisions.
Sure.
Because nobody wants to make a big decision right now because they really don't know what's going to happen.
And that's totally understandable.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, the only thing we're certain of right now is that things are uncertain. So what we spend a lot of time is focusing on what are the priorities that we know are not going to change no matter where we are in the current environment, pandemic or not. And talent and an emphasis around talent continues to be that area. And so no matter what we're doing going forward, we'll continue to have a strong emphasis and prioritization around how does talent help influence design. And I think, it goes beyond just the notion of trying to recruit, and it goes beyond the idea of simply just recruiting and retaining talent. I think at the end of the day, any place, any idea, any design, any space you're trying to collaborate on or trying to create, it needs to go beyond that and needs to focus on what are you doing to really grow, expand, and help whoever you're bringing to your organization feel like they're in a place where they can continue to learn. At the end of the day, people thrive on the idea of expanding their knowledge, growing their spending time learning new ideas, being innovative. People have latched onto that. It's so much about what our economy is today, is the notion of the experiential economy, and people want experiences because it helps them grow as individuals. And I think that is directly relatable to how we think about the ideas of how employers want to do whatever they can to attract talent and quite frankly, help grow that talent.
Yeah.
And we should design spaces that offer that.
Sure. I think it's just the basic human need of connection. We need to be connected to other people. And we can do a little bit of that through technology. But you
cannot, to read body language over technology.
But you cannot really replace, a face-to-face conversation, being with somebody. Even for people like me, I'm an introvert. I don't really need a lot of people around me. But it gets to the point where I'm like, oh my God, I really need to go somewhere and talk to somebody, not maybe for a very long time, but I feel it.
Oh yeah,
I feel it.
Yeah. I hear you. I mean, the idea of people trying to, again, the idea of virtual interaction, virtual learning, having flexibility to work from home. That's not going anywhere. It's absolutely warranted, and it makes sense in numerous examples or situations. But at the end of the day, people thrive and live off the ability to work with one another and collaborate. And it's a lot more fun to get work done when you can do it with someone you're next to than have to do it across the screen.
Sure. Yeah. I have a very selfish question. Me being an architect, and you working with architects. And I've asked this before to many people. What's your biggest frustration with architects?
Thinking they know the answer before we've solved the problem. That's my biggest
nice.
Yeah. And again, as someone that's not that doesn't have a background per se in true real estate development, but has spent a ton of time trying to figure out and solve problems. Yeah. Solving a problem, if you think you know the answer, is not going to get you the answer. It's going to influence, it's going to impact, and it's going to, quite frankly, deviate you from what could be the right approach.
And why do you think they know the answer?
Well, I do give our architecture partners a ton of credit for bringing their experience to the table.
Sure.
And that's why we engage and hire them. It's why we would love to work with people like yourself.
Yeah.
But there's a fine line between leveraging experience to help solve a problem and using experience to solve it.
Sure.
Using that experience to solve a different problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that part of that, and I think that even comes way back from even architectural education, that sometimes nobody shows you or teaches you how to do things better. The other thing is that sometimes when we're practicing architecture, we don't have very sophisticated clients. So people get used to just produce this set of drawings and build this box, and you get paid for it, and you think that that's being an architect. But there is a certain level when you really want to create experience, when you want to create accessibility, design intent, experiential impact. That's where you really need to understand the strategic part of design.
Yeah.
And I think that's what has been missing from our profession, because it had become very technical and about execution of, renderings, drawings. But the thinking behind it and the strategic value of design is being ignored.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what will really bring the most value, because we're trained, as you said at the beginning, we're talking about problem solving. We're problem solving through other different types of tools that we have as designers.
Yeah.
And we can leverage those tools to create strategies, thinking tools, processes that they're not necessarily a building, but sometimes I think architects in general, we are desperate to create the building, right? We're desperate to give that solution instead of giving ourselves the time to just think about it longer, discuss it with more people, because that's where the value will be. The execution is not that complicated. You get professionals that they know how to build buildings. They understand building systems. That's nice. But the strategy, that's where I think the real power of design shows up in really good teams.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. We've worked with great architects before, and we continue to work with them. And we've worked with architects that have continued to try to, as much as we appreciate the experience that they bring to the table, trying to solve a problem using the exact same solution you had for a different problem. Yeah, doesn't always work, and it's okay for us to take a step backwards sometimes to reevaluate and reassess everything. And that I think is the innate creativity aspect and uniqueness you see in real estate development.
Yeah. Sagar, how does the power of design impact who you are and what you do?
I would tell you that I never expected, as someone that has a technical background, as an engineer, that I would spend as much time as I do now with our partners, with our team, with our clients, and understanding and appreciating how intricate, how complex, and how unique design can be for every aspect of development. And, as ignorant as this might sound, early on in my career, I always anticipated it was just a component, a small piece of the puzzle, if you will, to solve the idea of going from nothing to creating value on the real estate side. However, it has become so clear, especially during my time here at Crescent, that it traverses the entirety of the development cycle. And quite honestly, it goes beyond that. Because at the end of the day, if a building has established and set really good design intent principles, that design continues to live on beyond the scope of the work that the architect, the team, the project manager brought to the table. And some of the best examples of that are here in Charlotte and throughout the world. And recognizing that has completely changed my perspective on how I think people need to be successful on the real estate side.
Good, man. I feel good hearing that as an architect, because, we're all very passionate about what we do.
Oh, yeah.
And I really believe in the power of design. And what I like about that is that my notion and perception and definition of what good design is keeps changing.
Sure.
Right? Sometimes I think people confuse design with artistic expression. It's not about drawing. It's not about pretty renderings. It's about experience. And what we're really designing as architects is not the building. It's the experience somebody's going to have when they're visiting that building. It just so happened that the tools to create that experience, it's a building.
Right.
But that's not the end. That will be a sculpture or something like that. When you're focusing on the object, you're not focusing on the person's experience.
Right.
Yeah. Great, man. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your experience and your knowledge with us. I really admire, who you are and what you do, and I look forward to stay in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. This has been fun, and it's a fun time right now to see what's happening in Charlotte, and really appreciate the chance to be here.
Awesome, man. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Design podcast. Remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Find out more about Jack and Osa Studio at osastudio.com and follow us on Instagram at The Power of Design Podcast. Thank you.